My name is Monk Rowe. I'm very pleased to have Ray Vega with me this morning. You are now a let me find your quote. A Vermont Rican.
Yeah, that's a yeah. See, I'm of the generation of first generation born of New Yorkers to Puerto Rican parents. So we proudly call ourselves the New Yorkers. But after moving to Vermont, I'm now 15 years in Vermont. That's my new moniker, the Vermonter Rican.
When you were a kid, did was there a distinction between young men and women born in Puerto Rico and those whose parents were born but came to the
I always found it interesting where in New York City they would say, "Hey, there's that Spanish kid. That's that Puerto Rican kid." Then I go to Puerto Rico, and family members would go, "There's Ralph's son, the American." It was always very confusing. But my parents were of the generation that came in the 1940s, latter part of the 40s, early 50s, and so when we were being raised in the projects, we lived in a predominantly African American community in the projects in the South Bronx, and you heard all the music and the culture of 1960s New York, 1970s New York. But when you entered our house, our apartment in the projects, you may as well have been in Puerto Rico. The smells of the food, the just a different energy and all of that. And it's so we were raised up always calling ourselves Puerto Rican, never calling ourselves anything but. It was like we're Puerto Ricans. It was just very clear to us. My parents are very proud of their heritage, and so you think about the first generation of kids born into like this thing, and so we're speaking Spanish to our parents at home, but then English to everybody else, and I think it was kind of neat that a lot of things continued, like the food traditions, music traditions. That's usually how it is with first generation parents. Because my three kids right now don't speak any Spanish,
Mhm.
and their mother's Puerto Rican, like I am, New Yorican, the same thing. So currently in Vermont, we're probably my wife and my three kids and my two dogs. We're seven Vermonter Ricans among maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 in the state.
Dave Valentine, uh, when I interviewed him, he said, this is a quote. He said, "My parents are from Puerto Rico. They migrated to New York and settled in the original South Bronx. It was a wonderful New York neighborhood, a mixed neighborhood, Italian, Jews, Greeks, and Puerto Ricans, and a whole true community where there was really no problem getting along at all." And he said that I think they brought the old values into the community:
Yeah.
be nice and do the right thing.
Yeah, that's how it was when I was growing up. And mind you, we were in the Mott Haven, which is one of the poorest parts of the poorest congressional district in the United States. But when we were coming up, the parents that moved their families into the projects were the next step up from living in the tenements. Like one of our neighbors, which I didn't find out until many, many, many years later. One of our neighbors was the Fleet family. And I always knew the Fleet family, they were all well dressed people. And then it wasn't until I was living in Vermont that I made mention on social media that I was speaking to my jazz history class about Biddy Fleet, who was the guitarist that worked with Charlie Parker. And then the son, James Fleet, contacts me. He tells me, "Ray, I never told you this, but that's my father." And he was living in the projects with us. They were living in the projects. I think Biddy wanted to continue. I think he continued a job as some kind of a social. He had like a government job, usually postal work, probably something to that effect. But that's what stopped him from going on the road and continuing playing music full time. But the son, James, went to high school with. He went to uh, elementary school, middle school, and high school with my brother Julio, all the grades. And he's a visual artist like my brother, but he's also plays saxophone. But these are the types of families that were living in the projects at the time. The projects were supposed to be a step up from the tenements of Harlem, the tenements of places like Williamsburg, Brooklyn, or where my parents moved in from, which was in East Harlem, which they called the barrio. So moving to the projects was like a big move up. Plus, my building had 13 floors, or the building's still there, had 13 floors and 8 apartments per floor. And I could tell you that as a kid growing up, I could probably identify every family in the building. We all knew each other, and people looked out for each other. And it was a hodgepodge of it was people from African American background, people that came up during whose families came up during the Great Migration of the latter part of the teens of the 20th century. There were folks that came in from Puerto Rico, some folks from the Dominican Republic, folks from the Caribbean like Jamaica. I remember there was a white family that lived upstairs, and he was a cop. His name was Carl, and we knew him. He was a cop. He was a beat cop. He had his uniform, and he was living in the projects. So we all, a lot of times people think, oh, the cops are not going to live. No, this guy, Carl, lived in the projects. And we all knew him, and the kids went to school in our neighborhood. It's interesting, yeah.
Were they tolerant of your trumpet practicing?
You know what it was? Those walls were so thick in those buildings that you could hear it in the apartment. But I would practice with a mute in. I kept it pretty controlled. I kept it pretty controlled. Also, I don't think that I really developed my serious practice regimen until I was already an adult and out of the projects, because you're young and you're just young and
you want to play stickball instead.
You want to hang out, you want to play, you got your girlfriend, you're listening to records, you don't know how to practice. And it wasn't until I found some really great teachers while in the mid 1980s, it really helped me to kind of focus how to practice and how to work on things. And one was a harmony teacher named Susan Winder. Another one was Henry Novak, who played trumpet with the New York City Ballet. And then for a short period, there's a guy named Lonnie Hillier, who played with Charles Mingus's band. And then I studied with one of Barry Harris's students, a guy named Bob Rigovin. So these folks really kind of showed me how to organize my thoughts. No, the dogs you might hear some crying back here. Those are my puppies. So the trumpet in the projects wasn't really an issue, especially when I grew up in the projects. So this was at the time where people were discovering disco music. So they would blast music outside of their windows, which is a real drag.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that. You were born in 1961, is that correct?
Yes.
So I picked a sort of an arbitrary time of 1975.
Mm-hmm.
You had been around 14. And I looked at the top songs, 1975. Number 1, Love Will Keep Us Together by Captain and Tennille.
Yeah, Captain and Tennille. I remember that pop radio.
Number 2, Rhinestone Cowboy by
Rhinestone. Yeah. Keep going.
And down at number 22 was The Hustle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
that was both. I grew up listening to all that music.
Well,
hearing it, I know I was hearing it in the background because I had family members that really loved that stuff. But at that time, in 1975, I started out at the High School of Music and Art. I was a freshman at that time. And I was discovering Charlie Parker and Dizzy and Freddie Hubbard. And that's what I was getting into. I was also really into classical music. So I was discovering some wonderful recordings, like there's a recording of the Philadelphia, New York, and I want to say Chicago Symphony Brass Sections playing the Gabriele Canzones. It was a very famous recording that was put out by, I want to say, RCA. So I had a really good trumpet teacher in high school named Sidney Baker, who was from that tradition. So you're around that. That's what you know. And mind you, this is before the internet. So if you wanted to really seek out information, you had to really you had to make a real effort.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make a real effort. Sorry, my dog just moved this. Stay there. Sorry about that, Mom.
This is, it's okay. We are doing
Whoa.
home studio today.
Yes.
When did the idea, I mean, you're playing a single note instrument. Do you remember around what age you were when you started to be curious and understand about how single notes match up with chord symbols and how those chord symbols work?
Okay, so my thing is this, and I share this openly with my students, and I let them know, don't be scared. I am the poster child for dyslexia. So the whole idea of the note and how it matches up to a chord, that was a nightmare for me. I knew what the note sounded like, and I could hear the chords, but making the match of the mathematics was a very major challenge for me. So I could play on rhythm changes. I could play rhythm changes. I could do, standards, because I had really good ears before I figured out what a 2-5-1 progression was. I could hear it. Gary Bart says something really interesting to me. He told me, your brain might be dyslexic, but your ears aren't, So getting the math of the music, the technical aspects, that was a challenge for me. That was a huge challenge for me. And I share that with my students so that they feel encouraged to allow their ears to be a helpful guide in what they're doing. So yeah, I mean, I studied harmony and I studied with some great jazz people, but it was a very a challenging process for me. So I'll put it to you this way. I loved what Bird was playing, but I couldn't understand it. I would sit there and go, whoa, like listening to, all right, Bird and Dizzy Gillespie. I remember hearing the first time I heard Things to Come, Dizzy Gillespie's big band. It was from an LP that I picked up around 1975, 76. And I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. It was incredibly modern, and it blew my mind. And I was like, this is amazing.
Okay, well, with all that in mind, your ear learning and your ability to play well and fit into the music, does this have ramifications for how you teach your students?
Oh, yeah.
I've had students who come to me with things they've learned from other teachers or perhaps on the internet, and they ask about certain harmonic things that I never use.
Right.
And so I'm wondering how to deal with
that. Well,
that.
what happens is these kids are also getting on the internet and getting tons of information and getting I think it's a sensory overload with the amount of information that they can get. So I slow them down and I just tell them, okay, well, let's slow down. And I let them know, you're going to have to learn how to play by ear. You're going to have to. I tell them, you're going to learn all these scales. You're going to learn all these patterns. You're going to get the sound of this under your fingers. But when it comes down to you playing the music, if you can't immerse yourself in the sound of the music and allow yourself to play, you're not really playing. I remember a conversation I had with Freddie Hubbard, where Freddie tells me, Freddie was funny. He goes, Ray, they're asking me, why did I play such and such a thing on such and such a chord on one finger snap? And he goes, man, at that time we were playing by ear. And I figured, and I didn't question him about that. I just listened to it and I went, of course they were, first of all, these guys were a community of players in New York. They were living in New York at the time, a lot of them. Okay, so they're a community of players. So think about who his contemporaries were at the time that he was hanging out with. He was hanging out with Coltrane. He was hanging out with Eric Dolphy. He was hanging out with James Spaulding, Joe Henderson. Those are just some of the saxophone players. Wayne Shorter, Cedar Walton, McCoy Tyner, Herbie, uh, and on and on and on and on. And you think about these great minds and how they're coming together for these Blue Note sessions, which they really just, these are not working bands. They got together, looked at the music, and went in. But at that point, they were speaking to each other in such a highly sophisticated fashion that they could hear through things. They could hear through things. So what I tell the students is, I tell them, you're not going to be able to play freely if all you're going to have is that piece of music in front of you and looking at the chord progressions to figure out what you need to play against that. You got to be able to get to the point where you hear what the changes are, because that's what I learned from playing by ear. I can go to a jam session and they could be playing all the things you are, and I knew exactly where they were at every given moment. I wasn't going to be able to recite the chord progressions to you, but I can hear where they were and I can hear the melody. And well, that was the whole thing with Doc Russell's. We would go out and do gigs, and by the time, maybe 5 or 6 months into my hanging out with them, I learned like 35 tunes, all by ear, that I would play with his band. And of course, I was young. I was a young kid, so I was going to sound like a young kid. But they never once mentioned one chord progression to me. They never did that. It was just like, check it out, listen to it. And one of the guys that was playing with Doc that would come to play many times with Doc was James Spaulding. James Spaulding from Indianapolis, of the fame of the Freddie Hubbard's group. Played McCoy Tyner, played with all these great recordings on Blue Note Records. But Spaulding would be there, we'd just go, yeah, try it again. Yeah, like you're trying to play, try it again. He never sat there and went, hey man, that's a minor 2-5 and you got to play this. Didn't do that. Don't get me wrong. I think it's important to learn the mathematics of it. But I think a lot of kids, what's the biggest problem with what a lot of kids are doing is that they're trying to play this music by learning the math about it, but they're not really immersing themselves in the actual music. They're not listening to the recordings. This is part of my discussion in my jazz history class. I walk in front and I pull out my thing. I go, this is the problem, folks. Everybody here has 5,000 tunes on them, and they listen to the first 20 seconds of one tune and they go to another one, and nobody's listening to music from the beginning to the end. And of course, now with the shuffle option that you have in playing music, you're not even listening to a recording from beginning to end. Put down Blues in the Abstract Truth, Oliver Nelson. Let it play through, turn it over. Let it play through, turn it over again. And that's how we immersed ourselves in the sound of the music around us. Also, I think another thing that's a big issue with how people are internalizing the music is that we're no longer sitting at someone's home with a beautiful stereo system going, hey, I remember in high school, trombonist, now he's a saxophonist, Pablo Carey tells me, I got the new Dexter Gordon record, Sophisticated Giant. You got to come over to the house and listen to it. And I remember going down to 24th Street. They had an interesting loft apartment. It was a great apartment. I remember getting up there, and he had like an old school stereo system, real nice sounding stereo. And he put that recording on of Dexter Gordon's Sophisticated Giant. And we just sat there, Pavel, myself, I think, Pavel Carey teaches in Maine. Another one of our buds in those circles was David Glasser, who plays lead alto with the Basie band. So we'd be sitting there going, oh, wow. And internalizing the music. Now, those guys are geniuses because they understood all the harmony stuff. My dyslexia was just like rampant, but it did not stop me from falling in love with the sound of the music. But what I'm saying is, this is what the issue that I have with this thing called jazz education is that we're teaching these kids all of this math without first playing a bunch of recordings of the blues and listen and just take that in and listen to it, because we're putting the cart before the horse. We're learning all of this math, but then these kids can't play by ear. I'll have these kids that can play triad pairs and do all of this stuff And I'll go up to them, I'll go boop, doobie dee, bo, ba, boo, da, and they're going, they can't do it.
They're trying to,
And
there's
that's a problem.
I've insisted that there's a magic to improvisation, to jazz improvisation, that's not really explainable. But that is a problem, I think, in the world of education, because you can't teach a 4-year program on jazz without getting into the codifying of it. I mean, how are you going to adjust?
How do you apply it? Well, how codifying? Yeah, I know. How do you explain it all? And how do you put it into words? The problem here, I would say, is that many of the academics that are coming out here right now understand the math of it, but they've never put a set list together in Europe trying to figure out who is that. Well, the heck with Europe, I've done that enough time. I'm talking about they haven't even done a local gig, looking into the audience and going, okay, we got to play this. Let's try this. Let's read the audience. Instead, they're going to go in there and just going to play their stuff and play all the patterns and everything that they learn. But there's a major disconnect. There's a huge disconnect. All right, so what we have to talk about here is that there are a lot of major jazz artists that play by ear. Stan Getz.
Lester Young.
Stan Getz played by ear. Chet Baker played by ear. Okay? Chet Baker played by ear. I want to say Nat Adderley played by ear. C.T. Clark Terry played by ear. He worked all of his stuff out. Maynard Ferguson. My people might go, nah, but Maynard Ferguson. Baloney. Listen to the early recordings of Maynard, because Maynard could play some bebop. Okay, Maynard, he had F's above double high C louder than anybody in the business. But and he told this to Art Falbush, who teaches at SUNY Oneonta, because Art's a doctorate was about players learning the tradition, or rather players that play by ear. And he interviewed a bunch of people, and Maynard was one of them. And so Maynard told Art, he said, the biggest mistake I did was that Dizzy asked me to come to his house so we could work on some harmony, work on some piano stuff. He goes, that was the biggest mistake I did, that I didn't follow Dizzy's advice. But he goes, but what I did learn was that if I wasn't going to do that, the ear had to be king. In other words, your ears have got to be right. You got to be able to know when you're not doing it right.
How do you make them right?
By having the amount of information in your head of what sounds right and what doesn't sound right in the bebop tradition, or even the blues. But understand something. Up until the I would say the inception of jazz, if we want to talk about it from 1917, if you want to talk about the original Dixieland Jazz Band, but baloney. If we want to talk about ragtime music and improvised music coming out of New Orleans, even up to the 60s, by and large, most of the music, the improvisations were informed by the melodies, as opposed to all of these chord progressions, the melodies. Steve Wilson, I was over at DePaul University, working with some students over there. But Steve Wilson, a great saxophonist, came in and gave a master class that was awesome. And he talks about when he first came to New York that he went to a jam session with all of the older cats from the Ellington, survivors that had played with Duke's band. And he asked them, he says, so tell me something, because he wanted to know how Duke worked with the musicians. And the cats told him that Duke would like sometimes write the person's name on the chart. So then Steve then asked him, well, when it came to soloing, how did Duke write out the chord changes? And the answer was, chord changes? They said, no, you had to listen to whatever the melody was, and you had to figure that out from that. So they weren't sitting down looking at like minor 2-5. The melody informed the improvisation. So you had to know the melody. And all those great solos from the swing era, those solos were people understood. They understood the melodies. Now, of course, you have geniuses like Coleman Hawkins, who's going to do what he did on like Body and Soul, where he starts introducing basically sheets of sound and that whole other approach of stuff. Now, was he playing by ear? Did he have great ears? I don't know. I don't know if he was understanding the chord progressions. I know that he was definitely looking to something a little bit different. You know, I know Dizzy played with him. So a lot of cats went forward and started to try some other things. But like even, I think it was Bird that was talking about this to some friends of mine that dealt with Bird, some friends of mine from Seattle that are already gone, but that knew Bird, and how Bird told him, I had to learn how to play all of these different things, whether it was, I think it was the blues, rhythm changes, Cherokee, and something else in all 12 keys. And he goes, then by the time we know, we're just playing by ear. They're playing by ear. They're not, I mean, they understand the chord changes most definitely. And I think it's important for us to learn it. But in the event of a person who's learning it by ear, how do I explain how Stan Getz could play on all of those Chick Corea tunes on that recording, Captain Marvel? Well, he didn't know how to play, he didn't know how to read chord changes. And you could hear it. You could hear it. Sometimes he deals with things in a certain way. Same thing with Chet Baker. I mean, all of those recordings of Have You Met Miss Jones by Chet Baker, they're not really good. I gotta tell you something. Because Chet always took that bridge that has like those giant steppy kind of things. And he never got it right. He never got it right. So you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I'm sorry.
I have to,
And I love Chet. Mind you, my record collection, I have a lot of Woody, and as far as trumpets, Woody and Freddie and Dizzy, but man, I got tons of Chet because there was something special about Chet. I love Chet, Blue Mitchell, Art Farmer. I like the cats that played the pretty stuff. I like Donald Byrd. I like those cats. They play real
you
pretty.
know, I have to insert, because I've often asked improvisers about what constitutes a wrong note, and most people say there is
Go
no
ahead.
wrong note. But you just pointed out something like Chet never really made the bridge.
He didn't make the bridge, man.
So,
I'm sorry.
well,
And people
so
are going to hear this and go, Ray, you're talking hate. No, this is coming from somebody that absolutely adored Chet Baker's playing. I will admit that when I saw Let's Get Lost, the movie, I had a difficult time listening to Chet's music for about 3 years because it gave such insight to his personality, which for me was like, wow, this cat was not cool. Such beautiful music coming out of like such a, how shall I say,
flawed.
a flawed individual. And he was a broken man. He was a broken man. He was broken. And so, you know, then my heart, as I get older, goes, you know, we are all flawed. So don't judge, Ray. Don't judge.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just picked up some recording now. I believe it was in the Netherlands. 2 sessions of Chet Baker with a quartet in the studio. Beautiful. I buy a lot of Chet. My next dog is going to be called Chet. I'm just kidding. This is Ella, by the way. Yes. But so the ear's going to let you know. Oh, so what constitutes a wrong note? Well, understand something. You're a half step away from where you need to be. You're a half step away. You got to know how to resolve what you're doing. You got to resolve. But Monk, this is the whole thing. The way that jazz is being taught right now, it's so mathematical, and I could see it by the performances and the presentations by many of the talented young players that are coming up right now, where their presentation is basically flawless in the way that they execute, the way that they maneuver around chord progressions, the way that they're able to do all of that stuff is like, wow, it's pristine, but it doesn't move my soul. That's me personally. Now, and again, I'm not talking, this is not, this music is in constant morph. This music is in constant morph. So I have to respect whatever the next generation of kids are coming up with. It's all good. You know, I teach jazz history. And it's, that's another dog here. Sorry, folks. I teach jazz history, and And I talk about that. I go, I'm not in love with everything about it, but as a person who plays this music, first and foremost, and I don't consider myself a jazz historian. I consider myself more like a jazz storyteller. I'll share stories because
Yeah.
that the historical end of it can get so boring. And so my kids at the school at UVM kind of dig my approach because I'm coming off from a place of like, let's listen to this,
Yeah,
let's
but
talk
the
about
other
it.
thing is, I think you're doing something that some of them don't have the opportunity, and that you're playing things like you play at the Vermont Hotel. Is that correct?
Every Wednesday at the Hotel
Yeah.
Vermont, we've been doing it for 10 years,
So,
except for the little hiccup with COVID, but 10
yeah,
years of 10 years of jazz.
I think that kind of gig is so important for musicians because it's real life, for God's sake. And you learn to play, you learn to observe your audience, that they're not 20 feet away in a whole row of chairs, in this big auditorium.
Right in front of
You
you.
are self-editing, and I'm not sure what my point is, but I feel a little sorry for the younger musicians because those gigs seem to be fewer and farther between these days.
Well, that's something that I think I talked to my students about because last night was great because yesterday I had a young man playing bass with me that's a student at the university because my two bass players are out of town. So I called this young man who's from the state. He's from Montpelier, and he's going into his senior year now at UVM, and I got him on the gig, and I got him on because I figured great time. Come on in, figure out what's going on. I kind of just guided him through what we were going to do. But these cats, what I do with these students is I don't just talk about what the music is. Oh, we got to play these chord changes, or rather, try this scale on this thing. I also talk to them about please turn yourself around and speak to your audience. A lot of young cats are coming up right now, and they've got this thing going on where they just play. This is this. They don't even talk to the audience. They just play. And I'm like, don't get me wrong. If it works for them, fine. I came up playing with people like Tito Puente, where Tito would just talk to the audience and they would laugh. I mean, I don't know how many times I'd be in a gig with Dizzy, not playing with Dizzy, but in the audience watching Dizzy. And Dizzy had that audience in his hand. He talked to them and made them feel like they were in his living room, and he joked around with them. And then when they played, it was serious. So a lot of times I feel that something that's left out in jazz education is the business part of it. Because I remember when I first got up here, I went to see some of the young cats playing, and I told them, hey, man, the music that you're playing, man, is the kind of music that you're gonna have 7 guys in the audience going, hey man, wow, giant steps in 7, man, that's really hip, man. And I would tell them, yeah, that's real cool, but the average person on the street they're not gonna get it, and they're not gonna be there to listen to that. I think jazz in general has always been a people music, but it's getting to the point where we're turning it into like something so far off and esoteric and cerebral that it no longer connects with people that are not necessarily musicians. So we have to think about the audience, and we could still play modern music that swings and is interesting, but we don't. I think we're teaching the next generation of players to create something that is so self-absorbed that it doesn't connect to a wide audience. And mind you, I mean, the folks that come, I posted something on social media recently or I talked about it on a radio show where I was hanging out with some of the folks that support jazz in this community. And man, one cat, man, this guy's got like 7,000 CDs in his house, and he's got like 4, maybe 8, 900 LPs, and he's been to every concert. You name an important event in jazz in the last 30, 40 years, he's probably been to it. And he's not a musician, but he knows everybody under recordings, and this room was full of those kind of people. So there are people that are going to be able to sit there and go, yeah, man, the real connoisseurs. But what do we do to be able to make the music so that those folks that come into the gig and or might be just there and never heard this music are going to come out going, man, that was beautiful. That was beautiful. I remember my girlfriend's mother, when we would go out to a gig, she would always grab me and give me a kiss, and she'd go, okay, Raymond, go out there and play pretty for the people. I'll never forget that. And I think it's important to do that. I'm not, and I am not sacrificing my art. I mean, I listened to recordings of Cannonball Adderley talking to the audience. Hey, how you doing? And then he would come out and play, something that was really, especially towards the end, because he was really pushing the envelope.
Yeah, he was. Hippodelphia.
Yeah. I recently played with Roy McCurdy, his last drummer. I did a West Coast thing with him up the Pacific Northwest. We talked about all of that stuff. It was, you connect with the audience. It's important that we do that. I mean, and that doesn't mean that we're not presenting art music, because it is art music, but let them see the humanity of the musician on stage. Unless you are just so shy that you can't speak, I get it. But we don't talk to our students about that. I talk to my students about, because I have one group at school. It's called the Post Bop Ensemble. That's the name of the group. I would have never called it that. But what these guys do is they come in, and I'll bring in some music for them to start, but their job is to bring in music and eventually start rehearsing that band like a band. And I oversee the rehearsal. And these kids, first things first, maybe one or two of them are music majors. The rest of them are engineers, astrophysicists, neuroscientists, all sorts of stuff. And these cats are on the case. We just graduated a young woman, trombonist, anthropology major, and but she was a double major in music. So we got these kids that are coming in that are really brilliant, but I have them develop the sets. And then when we're going to do a recital, I tell them, okay, now we got to tell our story. You just can't start and everything be at one level. You got to go through peaks and valleys so the audience can really enjoy the complete presentation. Now, where did I get that from? I got that from listening to records, from listening to albums. I remember working with Ray Barretto's band. This is the Ray Barretto's jazz group, New World Spirit. And we'd go into the studio, and then he'd want to come to my house, with a bunch of different cassettes of different sequences of, and we would sit there and go, man, no, let's try something different. And he would sit there with the cassette. Let's try no, this is going to be, because it was so important for him as an artist to be able to tell the story of what he wanted to tell. And so, since the audience in a situation like a recital doesn't have the power to hit shuffle, you have to tell them a story. You have to. So I talk to them about that, and I always tell them, because there's a place in town that does jam sessions on Wednesday nights, and they have jazz on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And a lot of these kids get to go in there, and I tell them, look at your audience, man. Yeah, you know what you want to play, and be prepared to play it. But look at the sequence of compositions. But the only way, look at the sequence of compositions, because you want to be able to tell that particular crowd what's going on. Like, for instance, yesterday, we played, I forget what we started out the gig with. We started out the gig with whatever, I forget what it was. But we were going to go into Duke Ellington's Azure. I think that's how you pronounce it, Azure. But I knew that it wasn't the right thing. I said, no, let's switch it up immediately. I said, no, let's pull something else out and put it in its place. Because you got to read the audience, that one's okay. Let's change the tempos around. It's important to do that, because the music isn't just the notes; it's a complete and total package, And mind you, be sensitive to the audience too. Be sensitive. Yeah, I mean that's just me. I'm not saying everybody's got to do it.
I'm totally on board with that. I want to ask you about your compositions and your original music. if you, I was listening to "Sweet Love of Mine" and
Oh,
some things
good.
that are on your
The court.
website,
Yeah.
and I like the fact that when the song is over, I can hum the melody back.
Yeah.
And
That's a Woody Shaw composition.
yeah,
See, that Woody's the perfect example of that because Woody's music was harmonically very intellectual. He included rhythmic elements from Brazil and as well as Afro-Caribbean rhythms and swing. And when he soloed, he was applying harmonic concepts that were not really that closely related to trumpet. They're mostly related to saxophone performance. But he played lyrically and beautiful. Even when he was playing his most abstract lines, it was always beautiful. Sweet Love of Mine, beautiful composition. Woody can write beautiful melodies with very interesting chord progressions. He knew how to do it. So I mean, Woody was one of the Woody. I'm going to say something. Woody to me was the last great innovator of jazz trumpet, in my opinion, because he took what was there before the schools of Louis Armstrong, Dizzy, Miles. Of course, he came out of a Freddie Hubbard bag. But the fact that he went into the direction of applying the Coltrane things, applying the Eric Dolphy things, applying the things that he got from Larry Young, applying the things that he got from Joe Henderson, and he really, really changed the approach of how to play the trumpet. And I don't think anybody's come to, I could be wrong there. And there's so many talented people. This is not I'm not besmirching any of his contemporaries or any of the younger cats that have come out. But he really did something different. I personally, I like the way Tim Hagens plays quite a bit because Tim comes out of that Woody thing, but Tim's also got a kind of a different thing, and he plays beautiful. Tim's
what
a
is it that
good old
makes,
friend of mine.
Phil Woods said that he didn't consider himself an innovator. He was a craftsman. And maybe I don't know how you look at your own playing, but does it get harder as time goes by to become an innovator, to come up with something that's new?
Something that's completely new. It's really difficult. We're in the age of we're in the information age on a different level. So there's so many things being thrown at us. How does one become an innovator? Well, I would say learn as much of the history, gather from it, and try to develop your own voice. At this point, I don't, like myself as an instrumentalist, I just want to be able to tell a story. Hopefully I have my own sound. I'm very derivative of a lot of all the people that came before me. And I would say so. I mean, yeah, there's some things that I definitely do that I've heard some other younger cats doing as well. And I go, oh, okay, I think you've been listening to some of my records, but I wouldn't call myself an innovator by any stretch of the imagination. But I just think of myself as a person who wants to be able to play in a fashion that would be respectful to the people that I hold dear to this music, the Freddies, the Woodies, the Dizzies, the James Moody's, James Spaulding. These are people that I came into contact with. I wasn't like dear friends with Woody or Freddie, but I have some funny Freddie stories which I can't share here because there's too much foul language in it.
Yeah.
But and it's all good. It was all very positive stuff. But I take in whatever those people did, and the things that I love from recordings by people like Donald Byrd and Art Farmer, and then of course I never really wanted to play trumpet. I wanted to play alto saxophone, and they didn't have them at the middle school.
Oh.
At the junior high school is what we called it back then. They didn't have them. I started 6 months too late, so instead of starting in September, I started in the band program in January of 1974. So we're going on to 50 years of me trying to play the trumpet, coming up right now when this January comes up, God willing. But all of this to say, so I have a close affinity with saxophonists, especially tenor players. Now, I just love the sound of that instrument. I like the voice sound of it. So there's a lot of that in my head too, just from all the tenor plays that I've listened to. But I just think it's important to come from a place of immersing yourself in the sound and hoping to create a statement. If it's innovative, fine. If it's not innovative and it's how shall I say, it sounds as if it's coming out of a lot of different people, that's okay too.
Yeah.
That's okay. It takes a long time to be able to develop kind of whatever you feel most comfortable with. I'm not one that likes to play things at super fast tempos. I
I'll
feel
tell you
more
one thing
comfortable. Yeah.
I like about your sound and your improvising is that your articulation is very strong and you never mumble.
Oh.
And
Oh, I have.
well,
I've done.
it's not
No,
on record then.
and I like the mumblers. I like some of the stuff with some of the guys. Stuff, But my thing is like, again, just try to make the statement. Try to be. I have a friend up here, Marty Fogel. He's a saxophone player that moved up to Vermont. He's from the New York area, and he played with folks like as diverse as like Lou Reed and Don Cherry, but he's my senior by several years. But he tells me, tell the truth and tell a story. Those are his two things. Tell the truth and tell the story. And I like that. That works for me,
But
and I'm real open to like I mentioned to you a lot of like maybe what would be considered like the hard boppers and stuff like that. But I listen to a lot of different I listen to the more avant-garde stuff. I'm listening to a lot of Muhal Richard Abrams out of Chicago, the AACM. Of course, folks like Don Cherry, of course. I'm getting into Anthony Braxton in my old age right now, listening to a lot of those recordings, listening to I'm really interested in hearing that stuff. And I don't think I could play the more far out stuff, but I'm finding myself sitting there like being pulled into this stuff and going, this is really quite interesting. So I'm not just one of these guys that wants to play the rhythm changes and bebop and the blues. I kind of like the more adventurous kind of things. And then I like pop music as well. You know what I'm saying? I don't have a problem hearing a recording of Herb Alpert. I grew up with that music.
as did I.
So, I don't have a problem. I'm not such a music, what's the word, snob. Oh, it's got to be this. No, I see there's purposes and purposes for a lot of things. Tom Brown, who played the funky trumpet from Jamaica, Queens back in the late 70s, early 80s. I like those records. It's all good.
Yeah.
Because it has a purpose and there's an audience for that. Rick
You try to tell
Braun.
your students about, well, I'll rephrase. Is there anything on the bandstand that will aggravate you?
Yes. Talking on stage. Don't talk on stage. Number one, that guy starts talking, you're in a gig. Can you not do that? That's number one. Number two, talking on stage is a drag. And talking between tunes is a major no-no. Like these kids will say, yeah, I'm going to be playing at such and such a place. Come out and see me. So folks come out and they're there and they play. They don't come prepared. They don't know what they're going to play beforehand. They start calling tunes at that very moment. And this is a working group. Let's do this. Oh, you have that chart? Yeah. No. Everything's got to be, people are out, go from one thing to another. My thing is like, have the music out. You finish. Go to the next one. And don't waste time. If there's more than 30 seconds between tunes, you're wasting everybody's time. You should be ready. So my thing is like, I was trying out the new bass player yesterday. So I told him, just get there a little early so that I could kind of get you into what we're doing. So I got there. I had music for him. Here's the charts. I told him what the sequence of the tunes were. I might make a quick change, but I told him, always keep your music negative so you can make a quick change. It's all good. But because the audience doesn't want that. Hell no. The audience wants to go from one thing to another unless you're going to speak to the audience. Hi, how are you? Welcome. This is such and such. But the musicians talking to each other? Nah. Another thing that's a big no-no for me is a musician walking up on stage and deciding before they play that it's time to warm up on stage. No, that's a no-no. People don't need to hear that shit. Sorry, that stuff. Sorry. You can take that out. They don't need to hear that crap. Go to a stairway or something and do that. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. So, respect your audience and don't show up looking like a schlump. Don't show up. I'm a New Yorker, so I'm gonna say that. Don't look like a schlump. Go in there, and don't let the audience be better dressed than you are.
You're defining what it is to be a professional.
Yeah. I mean, listen, when I was in New York City, because I live in Vermont right now, I moved from Vermont to New York City when I was 46 years old. 46?
Wait a minute, you moved from New York to Vermont or the other way around?
I mean, from New York to Vermont. I'm in Vermont right now. I've been here 15 years. So I was like 47 years old. Before I came up here, I had to earn a living in New York City doing a wide variety of things. Recording sessions, jingle dates of you don't know what the hell it's going to be when they don't send you the music in advance, and they don't give you now people have jingle dates. They're going to call you 3 or 4 days a month in advance. Oh, I've got to have a jingle date then. In the old days, it was like you got to call the night before because the producer was just finishing maybe the rhythm tracks or something like that. Arturo O'Farrell used to get me, as he was a contractor, and he used to get me on studio dates with his father. I can't thank Arturo enough for that. But I would go in there and there would be a studio orchestra in the studio while Chico O'Farrell conducted it. And we would run it, boom, in and out. We'd run it one time. And at the time, I think he was listening to a click track, but he had he would see the screen where he was and he would conduct against it. And he'd go, okay, let's have a run through. 1, 2, and we run it. Okay, let's record it. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, and you couldn't do that. They were like, oh, I made a mistake. No. You got to be really, really, really prepared to go there. And I'm not saying that I was a top studio guy. Hell no. But I sat there. If I walked in there and I saw Victor Paz, I would walk in to see Victor Paz on trumpet, Earl Gardner, Jimmy, what do you call that? Eddie Burt on trombone. Come on, man. I'm going to go in there and start screwing around.
You're not going to be talking either.
No, you got to go in there and get. So I was doing that. I was doing contemporary classical music. Like I traveled around the world with one of the last projects I did was with Osvaldo Golihov. He's a conductor of contemporary classical music from Argentina. He's a composer, rather, of contemporary classical music from Argentina. We travel all over the world. And I wasn't playing bebop on that. I was playing C trumpet, piccolo trumpet, and B flat trumpet in this work that he had, right? Again, was I playing spang-a-lang? No. But guess what? I was doing what I needed to do because I had a wife and 3 kids and mortgage payments and needed to get paid. And I wasn't going to sit there going, man, I want to play my music. No. I did not come up with a trust fund where my parents had some money set aside for me so that I can move to New York and be creative and move into an apartment in the West Village that they're paying the rent for while I try to discover who I am. No. This is about work. So I did everything from weddings, salsa gigs, big band gigs, dance bands. You got to do whatever you can. I don't know how many times this is my life. Play Saturday night with a salsa band, but remember, you got to be at church at 6 o'clock in the morning because they're having sunrise service, and you got to go in there and play "The Trumpet Shall Sound" by Handel's Messiah on D trumpet. Okay, get ready, and you're gonna go there with your puffy salsa chops going in there. And was I doing it because I necessarily want? I was proud of my skill set. And I would do it, but my endorphins were not going, woo, this is awesome. This is about, I have to pay my bills. So I often tell my students, when I first started to break in on the salsa music scene, man, I was not the best player by any stretch of the imagination. But what I was the guy who got there early and asked the band leader, what time is the gig tomorrow? Oh, okay. And I'll get to the gig early. What are we wearing? The black suit. Okay, wear the black suit. Show up. Don't bug the lead trumpet player with 10,000 questions about how to play the music. Sit there, shut up, listen to the lead trumpet player, follow that person from here to eternity, get the job done, because I needed to work. Did I want to be out there playing other kinds of things? Of course I did. Thank goodness that Mongo Santa Maria in 1987 gave me the opportunity to join his band. And then that introduced me to a whole world of jazz clubs and going out for a month and a half in the United States, going to Europe for European tours. So that opened me up to a whole different circle of players and gigs, etc. But I learned from that. It wasn't oh man, I'm on Mongo's band. All I'm going to do is play creative music. No. And also another thing is this. Before I started to teach, I would always have a side hustle, whether it was working at a preschool, working at a middle school, and they would always understand, mind you, I got to keep this one quiet here.
Got to do
it. They would always understand that, well, Ray needs to go out of town. So I worked at a preschool, a Jewish preschool in Manhattan, and do all my preschool work there, and still do gigs with salsa bands around town and do all of the types of work that I do, and let them know, hey, I have to go on the West Coast tour with Mongo. I'll be out for a month and a half. No problem, Ray. Everything's fine. Oh. So I always worked a side hustle because, even when I was working, when I would come off from a month on the road, I would always line up tons of salsa work because there was so much work to be had. And of course, the salsa bands were a great way to generate income. It was also, I would do wedding bands. I would do all of this kind of stuff, and never I'm above this. I'm a creative. I didn't talk any of that stuff because I needed to work. But I came up in that kind of generation. Mm-hmm. The working papers in New York State are 14 years old. It's legal. But I came up in a household where my father would look at me like, hey, your brother's 12 years old. When he was 12 years old, he was out shining shoes on 149th Street. So it was always a thing of work to survive. So I always figured out that I need to keep working. Because before I played music, I was doing private banking at the Bankers Trust Company of New York. And at the time that I was at Bankers Trust, I was still studying with Lonnie Hillier, studying with Henry Novak, and et cetera, doing that stuff, and still doing R&B gigs and salsa gigs. But I hated the job. And in 1985, I just left private banking and I started to play music full time. And my schedule blew up and I started to work like there was no tomorrow because there was so much work in town. And I wasn't sitting there going, oh man, come on, another salsa gig. I was just going, I have to earn a living.
Well, speaking of survival, let me wrap up with a question about, everybody's life has ups and downs. Is there something that has sustained you during the low periods in your life?
You have to really love what you're doing. You got to love what you're doing. And my wife has always been very supportive of me. So when I left private banking, she was like, good, I'm glad you're leaving. Most wives would go, you bum, what are you doing? So she was supportive of it. I have a supportive family. Look, I have two adult sons with autism that that I am their guardian. So that keeps me on track of what I need to do to take care of business. Mm-hmm. I have to take care of business. At 62 years old, I still have to be concerned with taking care of business. I have a spiritual faith system that I'm tied into. I unless folks want to talk to me about it. Other than that, I kind of keep it quiet. But I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ as the Savior of my soul, and and he has sustained me through cancer with my son Aaron, and through 80% of families with parents with autistic kids wind up getting divorced because the stress is just on a whole different level. But so you got to learn to laugh, and but as far as what gets me through it, I tell my students, unless you really love this, if you really want to do this for a living, because I have conversations with them like, hey, making a living in this is really difficult. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but what you should do is, as a young person, they need to learn all the technology, all the computer stuff, how to record, how to do sessions at home and all that, because the nature of the business has changed. Nobody's hiring, the whole idea of like, I laugh now because people post on social media, oh, I'm going on a European tour. How long are you out for? 4 days. I'm like going, come on, man. Man, I remember those gigs, 7 weeks on the road. I would take 2 suitcases with me because it was rough. You had to take, yeah, I remember that. And it wasn't easy, so those things are not really in existence anymore.
Yeah.
That doesn't really exist. There is not an Art Blakey out here hiring the next set of young cats to go out and play. It's just not, sadly, it's not happening. I think that's sad. So I think many of my contemporaries or older have somewhat dropped the ball because they chose to play with their older friends and stopped mentoring the next generation of players. So, whether that's a Maynard Ferguson or an Art Blakey, or Horace Silver, etc., a Betty Carter, she was out there taking the young bloods and going, okay, I'm going to teach you about this. So that's not really happening. But the nature of the business has changed so much. There is no record recording industry. Anybody and their mother can record. Anybody can put their stuff on social media and become a sensation and never have paid any dues.
Right. Well, this has been a very upbeat chat, Ray.
Yeah, man. And I'm a happy person. Some folks might perceive some of the things that I say as like, oh, he's just dark. No. I love the music and I love to watch. I'll tell you something. I enjoy being in the moment of discovery when I'm playing, but to watch my students have a moment of discovery in their lessons or on the bandstand when I'm playing with them, that's worth $1 million. I had a student in my class, my jazz trumpet student, and he put the horn down and he started to cry. And I went, what's happening, man? He says, I didn't know I could do that. I went, well, you just did it. He played through like something like Lady Bird or something, and with just the most, I gave him some concepts of how to play through it, and I'm, with rhythm and stuff like that, and he played a nice solo. And I went, you played all the changes, and he was like, I didn't know I could do this. I went, yeah. I said, you're a human being just like I am. So yeah. Anyway, I love all of it. I'm not a hater in anything, and when I talk about the young generation of players coming up, they're gonna have to figure it out. Then again, maybe I have to figure out what the new thing is because it's completely changed. It's about media presence and putting all sorts of stuff online on a daily content creation. That seems to be the way that people get record deals and what's the word, tours, etc., without having paid any dues with an older musician that's going to tell them, excuse the French, yo, that's some sad shit. You're not doing that here. Okay.
Well said.
Okay. I got that from Ray Barretto, from Mongo, from Tito Puente. Oh my God, they read me the riot act. It wasn't going to be a walk in the park. And from older, my thing was learn from the band leaders. Shut your mouth. Learn from the older cats because they're there. So I don't know how did this one go? Next time, we have to have all 3 dogs. So this is Mitzi. And then this is Ella.
And Ella.
Dizzy's floating around somewhere. But I had to pick them up because they were making too much noise.
Dizzy was good at floating around, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was okay. I think he's sleeping on the sofa. But yeah, right. If there are any questions, just let me know.
Okay.
Good.
I'll pause this and we'll say our goodbyes.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.